Welcome to the EchoCast. I am Bon Diesel. This is a podcast about the Division 2, maybe the Division 1 if there's anything to talk about. And, yeah. So what are we dealing with today? Well, I am going to do a State of the Game recap, a special report recap, raid, and some other Division topics, a little speculation, and then we'll wrap it up with some listener questions. If you want to support this podcast and any of my other projects, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. You will also gain exclusive rewards and early access to this podcast and other content. If you're new, welcome. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. I don't know how you tolerate me, but I'll take it. So first, I'm going to jump right into a State of the Game recap. This week, we had Hamish and Yannick. They mostly talked about the title update 3 and talked a little bit of raid stuff. The top of the mind thoughts that they gave us was talking about how the title update 3 had a balancing pass, classified assignments were added, the end of activity stat screen, and lots of other bug fixes and a ton of balancing and changes. The weekly reset happened on the day of the title update 3, but they warned everyone that it would reset again at the regular time. So there was like a 2-day window for people to get their blueprint for the nemesis if they had everything else. They basically said that there was a wonky schedule, with the invaded missions because of the patch, and kind of a shrug, sorry. They talked about how the hardwired chest stats were re-rolled because there was an issue with how they were rolled before, where I believe they were way too high. They mentioned that they knew there were delta arrows happening. I think since then it's mostly been fixed up. I've seen some reports of issues, but I think by now it's fine. They did talk about Roosevelt Island. They talked about they're not being able to progress through the mission because of a couple bugs that are popping up, and yeah, that will have to get fixed. Basically, if you die, you respawn at a checkpoint, but that checkpoint doesn't allow you to move forward in the mission. At least that's how I think it works. They did dive right into the raid matchmaking conversation, and they basically referenced that they didn't do it because of the potential of a bad experience dealing with a random group and extremely tough content. I'm going to talk about this in depth during the Division 2 news and stuff like that. But they basically just said that the activity is catered to a group experience of people that are actually talking, they're trying to reinforce the social side of things there. We'll come back to that. Classified assignments are little side missions that show new areas and have intel and collectibles in them. There were 2 of them available. This is only if you have the Year 1 pass. There was a new apparel event that started when the raid released. And let's see, I believe that it ends on the 13th of June, but you can only get keys until the 6th. So be sure to get out there and grind. I've actually gotten more keys than I thought from doing fairly regular activity. So I don't think you need to pay for them if you play quite a bit, but if you want to, the option is there. Let's see here. The pre-order and Ultimate Edition cosmetics are purchasable. And I think they're really cheap. They're only like 20 in-game credits. Kind of annoying a little bit, in my opinion, for someone who pre-ordered and had the Ultimate Edition. I kind of like the idea of something that doesn't impact the game actually being exclusive, but it's fine, not the end of the world. They did start talking about a little bit of the raid stuff. Now, the special report, which I'm also going to recap, was way more in depth on the raid. But that's fine. We'll figure it out. Basically, they talked about how incursions were a step towards raids, but obviously not all the way. That's when they revealed that Operation Dark Hours was going to start on Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. I think a lot of people were surprised with how quickly the raid came. They talked about the Eagle Bearer being a new exotic AR you would get from the raid, as well as the gear sets that will be raid specific, as well as some vanity items. The raid will provide extra loot once a week on a reset timer for when people beat it. And then they talked about the special report that was coming up. They talked about the world's first team being immortalized in the base of operations for everyone. Talking about how, the raid is the first time we've had like truly competitive content in the division where there's some type of prize for doing an activity the best. And then they talked about there's some rewards for beating the raid at all, and there's rewards for beating the raid in the first week as well. They did clarify that they are going to make sure the world's first is quote unquote legit, by making sure that the people didn't cheat or do anything like that to do it. They did have Twitch drops, which I think are still going on actually. So if you watch a channel that has them enabled for I think an hour and a half, you get some extra keys to open. To open the cosmetic caches, that the event caches. They mentioned a Twitch Rivals competition, but that ended up being canceled because I saw multiple reasonings for it. Some because there weren't enough people that entered, some because they were worried about the stability of the servers. I think that was kind of a BS thing, just people hating on the game, as they do. But that is what it is. Check in here, and that was about it for that. So they did some agent highlight stuff, and they had to explain to Yannick what welding was. I assume that was more of a translation issue and not him not knowing what welding is. Okay, and then they had a special report where they had Chatty and Sebastian, I believe his name was, from the dev team in Annecy, Ubisoft Annecy, which like they showed a little video about where Annecy is. It's near the French Alps or whatever, and that's like the most beautiful place on earth. So these dudes seemed really happy and nice, and I think I get why, because they work in a freaking painting. But when it comes to the special report, they talked about decisions they made, and they talked a little bit about how the incursions influenced the raid and stuff. They talked about how it was the first decision they made was that it was going to be an 8-man thing. They wanted it to be 8 from the very start. They said that wasn't even possible in Division 1, but they made it that way now, and they wanted to take advantage of it. They like the idea of the larger groups for more interesting mechanics and synergies. They emphasize how they want each player in the group to be meaningful or impactful. Sebastian was heavy into World of Warcraft and raiding in that game, so it inspired him a lot for Division. The Division 2 raid, they talked about the matchmaking stuff again, which at this point I'm kind of over, even though I'm probably about to rant a bunch about it after the break. But they emphasize that once you touch the raid, you'll understand why matchmaking wouldn't work. That communication is key, and one player not doing what they're supposed to do will mess everything up. I've got some issues with that, but I'll talk about it in another section. They did confirm that there will be some type of matchmaking at some point, but gave no timeline. They want to try to take into account language issues, voice use, etc. My guess here is like an LFG type system where it's not matchmaking, but it's an in-game post that you're looking for players and requirements that you have for people to join, which we'll get there. They showed a trailer for the raid. They really, stressed, that this was not going to be the only raid. There's going to be raids, multiple. So that's a really good thing. I think there were some people who I think had questioned, like, well, they're just going to do one, and we'll have to wait for Division 3 or something. I thought that was kind of silly, but that's fine. They talked about how the journey from Falcon Lost and Stolen Signal to this raid was a pretty big deal. They learned a lot of lessons from those. They realized, and they talked about how they realized that Falcons Lost was kind of a letdown for most of the community in Division 1, or at least that's the impression I got. And as a player, I would say yes, because it was just a wave mission, basically. And that when they moved on to other incursions like Dragon's Nest, the mechanics involved, as well, especially Stolen Signal, which I thought was a really, really good mission. Personally, I don't think it was a raid. It wasn't, compared to what we have now, especially, but even bigger raids. But I thought Stolen Signal was a really underappreciated mission. It was a really well designed mission. The biggest issue, in my opinion, was just that the rewards weren't there. There was nothing exclusive to get from there, and you were better off running Clear Sky. They talked about the beginning of like designing Operation Dark Hours, the new raid, and talking about how they wanted to like feel epic. They wanted it to feel big and grand. They wanted there to be combat puzzles and more than just murdering everything in sight. They talked about how there are unique behaviors from enemies that you've seen before, so you have to learn those things, and specific mechanics that you're going to have to figure out and work on, which now we've seen. And I think they were pretty honest and accurate about their description of the raid during this. They did talk about the challenge of making puzzles and stuff like that while keeping a realistic aesthetic to the game, and the quote-unquote real-world logic that the Division is based on, the Clancy universe. They talked about how the location of the DC airport was good, because it's near the playable space, but it's still separate. The whole idea of the raid is that the Black Tusk have taken over the airport, and they have some type of super weapon that they want to use to help their mission over in DC. They answered some questions at the end, especially, and talked a little bit about how there actually wasn't like double the cover because there's double the players, and they said in some ways there's actually less cover because they wanted to emphasize people needing to be moving around and not just be static the entire mission. When it came to researching the raid, they weren't able to go like check out Ronald Reagan International Airport, so they had to mostly use like Google Maps, pictures that just that people had taken, and kind of their own experience from airports in general. And then they basically just had to make up all of the behind the scenes stuff because obviously they didn't have access. They talked about the prerequisites for getting into the raid: World Tier 5, gear score 490 and above, and access to the pilot at the boo. They talked a little bit about the details of the raid. I won't really get into that. They talked about there's 4 total bosses. There's a gear check at the beginning, which that's to say the least. They did mention that there's some exploration puzzles hidden in the mission itself, separate from the 4 bosses that you fight. And I actually haven't seen much about this yet, so that's something I'll be excited to see someone do a video about it or something, or hey, maybe experience it myself. We'll have to wait and see. And then they just basically talked about kind of the same stuff a little bit over and over again. So they answered some questions. That was kind of the gist of it. Overall, I thought this was good. Obviously, some people took issue with the update and the raid coming out in such short succession. My assumption there is that we have the first DLC coming very, very soon. So they kind of wanted to get this like out there and kind of get people into it and get through it and then move on from there. Obviously, I'm sure everyone would have preferred that the game come out back then, but it didn't. So that just kind of is what it is. So what we're going to do is I am going to jump into the mid-roll, and then I have some topics I want to talk about, and we'll go from there. So mid-roll time. Okay, so first thing I want to say is that I sat at work while I was doing some stuff and had Marco and his team on in the background, and watched essentially their whole push on the raid. It was 5 hours something. I missed like the last hour of it because I had to go to work. I had to do something off out of the office, so I wasn't able to keep watching. The raid's really good. So, you know, I want to make that really clear. The raid is excellent. The mechanics are cool. The challenge is there. You know, I think there were people that were worried that, you know, that first run that people were going to steamroll through in, you know, an hour or less. And but not that people aren't now, but you know, that first run, it felt satisfying. Now, something I had mentioned before this raid came out was that there are going to be people that no matter what happened, they were going to compare it to Destiny, and it wasn't as good as Destiny, which it never will be to some people. That it wasn't going to be a success and all that. That's fine. People can do their thing. But let's talk about raid completion and difficulty. So it was completed first by Marco Wids and a bunch of those people. In 5 hours something minutes, which is super cool. In case you're curious, there's teams beating it in less than 30 minutes now on PC. And that's where an interesting conversation has popped up. As of today, I'm recording this on Sunday morning. It looks like one team has completed it, or maybe two teams on PS4 and one team on Xbox. The first PS4 team, I think it took them 36 hours. I want to say there's another one that's completed it in like 18. And the one team I see on Xbox as I look right now completed it in about 17 and a half hours. So there's an issue here, and what's really interesting in the last week or two has been this difficulty conversation and this matchmaking conversation. So to me, what it's shown is a complete disconnect between people who play on PC and people who don't, and a lack of awareness in general of people and who plays this game. And what I mean by that is, you know, most of the people who play on who play the game, who are involved in the community, who are on Twitter and Twitch, and YouTube, and the forums and Reddit, are a very tiny sample of the overall player base, right? And something that I don't think people realize or care about, either way, is that looking at the sales report from Ubisoft that came out recently, they sell more games combined to Xbox and PS4 than PC, right? And when it comes to Division specifically, it's on all three. Ubisoft has some games that are only on PC or are basically only played on PC, so I think that even skews the numbers a bit. But what I don't think people think about or care about, I sometimes can't tell which one it is that they're your average dude who jumps on his Xbox isn't involved in the community, or his PlayStation, more PlayStation, like twice as many on PlayStation probably. They don't mess with Twitter, all the power to them, to be honest. They don't mess with Discord. I'm on Discord. I've been on for a long time, and I think Discord's the worst. It's an awful format. It's just not. It's not a well designed app. There's nothing about Discord is good except that it provides easy voice communication and connects people. Just my opinion. But they don't access all these ways. You know, the average console player, I think, still today, is someone who jumps on, plays for a few hours, maybe has a couple buddies they play with, and that's it. So when this raid comes out, you know, that's tough, because in the Division 1, I remember not long after release, one big topic was how much content was really required a group of four for most players, and how that was a struggle for a lot of players. And then then we have this raid come out. Now it requires you find 7 people, and then it comes out that there's no matchmaking. So I'm gonna cover 2 topics here, kind of in a row, and then I'm gonna do some speculation, so something more fun. So stick around if you can. So first, the matchmaking. So what's really interesting is that there's been this kind of funny attitude taken by people who are Destiny players, or people who are content creators, or who are big streamers and stuff like that, who are just adamantly against any type of matchmaking for the raid. And the issue I take with this isn't really with, well, it's a little bit with the game. The problem is what people want is a way to find other players and complete this raid. Without matchmaking, that takes away the simplest option to do that. Now, what's funny is that, after playing the raid, now, the people who were adamantly against it at all are now feel emboldened and have said, well, look how hard this raid is, especially on console. There's no way you can matchmake it. It'd be a disaster. And I agree, actually. I think that's correct. What I don't agree about is that, sorry about that alert. What I don't agree on is that I think that's missing the point. For whatever reason, people are so like dug in on this idea of no matchmaking, and to the point where, like, it's almost like a condescending thing. It almost feels like an elitism type of thing of, I mean, I've literally, unfortunately, had back and forth with people where it just turns into a get good situation where, well, if you don't have 7 people, then you just need to find them, get good. And it's funny because a lot of these people who are taking this attitude are people who would really not appreciate that attitude in another context. And the issue I take is that it's not even with the game, really. They even said, it sounds like from I think it was a special report, that there is going to be some type of system for the raids. I don't think it's going to be matchmaking. I kind of hope it's not, because it won't be very good. What I do hope is that it's like an LFG type system where you can start up a raid group, and if you have 2 spots open, you can hit a button and you can select criteria or something. You can select like what region you want the people to be from, what English it's going to be in, that requires a mic, all of that stuff. The problem is that it doesn't seem like there's many people looking at this situation, and they're so stuck on the matchmaking idea. The matchmaking is just the easiest way to do it, and probably the worst. It's weird. It's weird seeing this attitude of it. I don't know if it's like gatekeeping or whatever it is. It's just like this weird attitude of, I don't care if this interaction or this activity is awful for you. I think it should be this way, and if it's not that way, it's not good. I don't know. The matchmaking thing is weird because I think most of the people who are against it are missing the point of why people want matchmaking. They just want to find people to play with. They want to find people to beat the raid with, PC or console, whatever. And unfortunately, it's just weird because it seems like the people who are the most passionate against matchmaking are basically all the people who will never have to do it. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I don't need to worry about matchmaking. I have a pretty good feeling. I'm small fish, And there's these people who are 5, 10, 15, 20 times bigger than I am, who are just so against it. And they will never have to even consider using it. It's just bizarre. I don't, and not even just matchmaking, any system that just helps people find groups. And it's just, it's such an interesting thing where it almost just feels like they don't want people to be involved. If you aren't as dedicated as them, I don't know. It's weird. And I think that there's just a lack of empathy. I think there's a lack of trying to really understand what people want or have a problem with. And I would hope it's just like naivete. I hope it's just some stubbornness. but sometimes, you know, some of it just seems downright aggressive against people who aren't up to their standards. And it's just really weird, man. But I don't know. I won't try to assume people's intentions. I'll assume the best, and we'll go from there. So then what this conversation piped up before the raid even came out, right? So then what happened after the raid came out was Marco and his crew beat it in a little, like 5.5 hours or something. And then the console race started. So, you know, the whole thing with raids, as I'm aware, especially in Destiny, is that the biggest, you know, the biggest delay in the raid being completed is people figuring out the mechanics, right? So after Marco and his team beat it, now everyone who was watching that, or people who were summarizing what happened, have a basic idea of the mechanics. It's gotten to the point where the last thing I saw was that there's a PC team, the DUK clan. I think they're in Germany, which I think there's another one in England too, but you know, we'll figure that out. They're beating it in like 25 minutes, the entire raid. And what's happening on the console side is, as of recording, I believe 2 teams have beaten it on PS4 and 1 has beaten it on Xbox, and the fastest clear was 17.5 hours. But the first clear was 36 hours. And what's super interesting is that there's been this kind of nose up in the air, like, look, you know, one, it's the whole thing about, you know, the difficulty of the raid, but yeah, in the matchmaking. But there's been a lot of talk about how the raid, quote unquote, is too hard for console. And what that's turned into is another kind of PC circle jerk to a point of, you know, well, you use the crappy controller, that's your fault, you know, it's not hard, you know, you just need to get better. I've seen multiple instances of people talking about how there's no hardcore players, there's no highly skilled players on consoles, they're only on PC. I even saw a really hilarious comment on Reddit where the person said, people paid more for their PCs, therefore they're more dedicated and passionate gamers, and that's why console players can't match them. Which, you know, I literally grabbed a lamp beside me and just smashed myself in the head with it until there was nothing left. Like, I just like, it's such a bizarre attitude. Of course, these are the same people who are going to say that PC gamers are like 95% of the gaming community, that, you know, all that stuff that people just don't have any clue about, you know, how those things actually break down. But what's interesting is that now, especially after the raid has finally been cleared by PC players or console players after 36 hours, is that there's this kind of like, see, look, they can do it. And it's like, if you can't look at a situation where the PC players, some very skilled ones, were able to beat it in under 6 hours, and then within a day were beating it in under 30 minutes, but that it still took over 36 hours for the first clear of a team that knew every mechanic, that knew everything. Like there's an obvious issue there. And the first thing that it goes to, and something I've talked a lot about, is just a kind of a discrepancy in the way the game plays for PC and consoles. And I've had a fairly passionate discussion with someone who I do really respect, but definitely doesn't see eye to eye with me on this. The game plays very different. I think there's a decent number of people who play on console and PC, and all of them, including myself, can say that the game just plays very different on both. But it's because of the way that your input is taken. Mostly people on PC using mouse and keyboard, you know, everyone on console using a controller. Yeah, I know there's some people on PC with controllers who think that like half the player base does that. It's not true. It's weird too. I get if you played console your whole life and then you switch to PC recently, it definitely probably feels good. It probably feels better than mouse and keyboard to you. But I promise that if you spend time on the mouse and keyboard, you're going to be better than you ever were on the controller. Maybe that's a PC Master Race thing I have, even though I'm a console player. but it's just the way I think it is. But anyways, there, you know, the game is exactly the same. See, this game is balanced exactly the same on PC and console. There's zero differences. To the point where when you plug in a controller to the PC, it even maps all the controls the same as a console, except like the Xbox button or whatever the PlayStation equivalent is. And an issue that's been around since the first game has been that the PC experience is, you know, quote unquote easier than console experience. And it's because of significantly increased accuracy, which leads to extremely low time to kill on PC compared to console. The whole idea is that basically it's headshots. It's significantly easier to hit headshots with a mouse and keyboard than it is on a controller. And there's multiple reasons for that. It's, you know, just simply pointing and clicking just provides you more control of your aim and stuff like that. A big issue too on console, because the retort that always gets thrown out there is, well, console has auto aim. Console does have auto aim. The problem with auto aim on console though is that it favors the chest. It favors the middle of the enemy. So on a high damage to elite build or something, that's fine. You're hitting shots. That's all that matters on console. But hitting headshots for most players, obviously there's some, I'm sure, you know, I've got some, you know, MLG people out there who are going to disagree, but it's harder to hit headshots on console and to consistently hit headshots on console than PC because of the input method. And what that means is that since the games are balanced exactly the same, that just means that time to kill for console players is a lot slower than it is for PC players. So then when you look at the raid, what happens is that the raid is most of it, the first boss, Boomer, and then the fourth boss, the big, whatever it's called, Hedgehog or whatever it's called, and are very, very, very highly dependent on DPS and putting out as much damage as possible. And this again is to my previous point, where the accuracy issues cause problems for consoles and don't seem to cause many problems for PC players. What I assume here is that for the most part, this discrepancy didn't really cause much of an issue in every other aspect of the game, because while the time to kill on console is definitely slower than PC, the content's still clearable. I didn't have any issues even with Tidal Basin. You know, it's even at the harder levels, you know, I have a really nice weapon damage, AR damage, and damage to elites build. I have a good amount of health and all that. Like, I don't have to I can hit some headshots and they help, especially on static enemies, but I don't have to. I can melt even, hell, I melt golds faster than red bars. So it wasn't an issue because there were so few mechanics or anything that required high accuracy. And Tidal Basin at the end, you have to hit those packs on the missile launchers, but it's pretty easy. They're static, they don't move, they're just right there. But then with the raid, what's happening is even just on the first boss, Boomer, you know, console players know what to do. They get how to beat it. But with that healing mechanic on Boomer, and you know, it just makes it incredibly difficult. I played with a group of, I think, very good players, very competent players, and we cheered when we got Boomer down 2 armor bars. You know, like, you know, and that was an accomplishment after 3 hours. We were so pumped. Like, we understood what we needed to do. It just came down to, you know, maybe we aren't the best players on earth. That's fine. But that we also, you know, were fairly limited. Now, that point may be taken away by the fact that these people have cleared it now. But I still think that even though console has now beaten it, and even though they've gotten it down to 17.5 hours, you know, a day later, 17.5 hours compared to people on the other platform beating it in 30 minutes and less, shows that there's just there's an issue there. And I'm gonna preach it to the rooftops that there's an issue there. That's not it's one platform is harder than the other one. So as much as, some, not all, some PC players want to down on consoles and do all that stuff, they're playing the easier content, whether they'll acknowledge it or not. And it seems that's obviously my opinion, but it seems at least correlationally true. One does it in 30, the other can get to 17 and a half. Like, that seems, from a very pure standpoint, that one is easier than the other, right? And I guess what's a bummer about this, and some of the conversation what I picked up and stuff like that is, Destiny 2 does not differentiate its balancing between PC and the console. But I tried to play Destiny 2, couldn't get into it, tried multiple times, just can't do it. So I haven't done a raid on Destiny, straight up laying that out there. But the impression I've gotten is that, for the most part, the raids on Destiny just don't have mechanics that depend on that super pinpoint accuracy of PC. It still does reward accuracy. I've watched 2 or 3 of the different raids, and I know that there is that involved, but it's different. And so my issue is that basically what I'm getting at is the Dark Hours raid seems like it was designed on a PC for PC, and I would be very curious to how much playtesting was done on console for this raid. Maybe there was a ton, maybe they did more than they even did on PC, and we're a bunch of plebs and there's nothing there. But I doubt it. It's fine, I get it. In conversations I've had, I understand that, trying to balance the game separately, having 2 different branches of the game, one PC, one console, that focuses different changes and balancing and stuff for each one, that would potentially double the amount of time it takes to get patches out to us and all of that. But I don't really accept that as an excuse. I think it's weird that you're asking. It's just odd. And if anything, it's odd to me that I don't know. Like, I don't know how to express it. It just doesn't make any sense to me it's just like, well, that's just the way it is, especially when the game isn't even being balanced for what is, I think, definitely the majority of the player base. I don't know. At the end of the day, it's a super awesome raid. I'm really glad that they've done it. I really hope the next one focuses more on like actions as mechanics and things that you do as a group and things that you have to do as a group, and not so much on hitting this tiny little spot on this enemy that is super easy for one platform and way harder on the other. I'll leave it there. So getting away from all that super fun stuff, my other little thing I wanted to talk about here was the episode 1 speculation. So we have the new DLC coming out here, I assume in the next month or 2, called DC Outskirts Expeditions. And while it's been widely theorized by people that the 3rd DLC, where it has like the picture of it is like a blurred out background with an agent who has a mask on, everyone's I feel like a lot of people have been looking at that and saying, well, that's going to be survival. No, they have a mask, it's going to be in a contaminated place. So here's where I'm going to say I think that's wrong. I have no idea what that 3rd DLC is. I think the 2nd DLC, the Pentagon, is definitely going to be some kind of evolved underground mode, probably very different than underground, but in the same idea. And I think the 1st DLC, DC Outskirts Expeditions, is going to be our evolution of survival. And the reason I believe that is because I really don't think that they would save a survival-ish mode for the last DLC. I think that they'd be very smart to give us some highly replayable and even kind of random interactions with others from the very beginning for the 1st DLC. I also point out that the whole idea of an expedition, you could think of in the way of survival. You going into an area with a goal, but not to stay there forever, to come back to explore. And I think that the expeditions are going to be this new idea of survival where I bet there's going to be more than one area. There's going to be multiple different maps, and you're going to get dropped into, or you're going to go into new areas of the game, or separate maps, kind of the way that like the raid is in the Pentagon, I assume will be. And you're gonna be there, you're gonna have some goal, and you're gonna need to return. And it would seem logical that potentially there's a bunch of other people also. Now, because you're on the outskirts, maybe the Shade Network doesn't reach there, and it becomes a free-for-all. That whoever gets it first gets, can collect that reward. And I think that's a way that they could do survival. And I think that it's been kind of hiding right in front of our eyes. I really think that third episode is going to be something to wrap up the story. I wouldn't be surprised if it's even just a narrative DLC. I think people are just assuming it's going to be some type of multiplayer or something. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe it adds some new area to the map, adds like 5 or 6 new story missions, and then leads us into year 2. I really, really, really do believe that this DC Outskirts Expeditions, I think that's going, I don't think that's just going to be a simple map expansion. I think that's going to be some round-based mode where you have to go in and complete a goal and get back, and you're going to have to compete with other agents to do it. Now, whether I'm right or wrong, we'll find out, I think, really soon. There is E3 coming up. They had a bunch of Division 2 star players that they picked out, so there's obviously something for them to see there. And it seems just timing wise, because you have to remember that this raid was supposed to come out back on the 25th of April, so it came out a few weeks late. There was supposed to be this whole like month and a half before E3 of just people doing the raid and talking about the raid and doing the raid. So now that timeline shortened, but it doesn't change that we should have that coming very soon. So that's my guess. I am more than happy to hear your opinions. I've definitely been shut down by a lot of people, which is fine. This is just a pure speculation thing. And, I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. Okay, so we have a couple of listener questions. We have Hassan, or Shami Soul. He says, after seeing the raid, do you think that the DLC will be new modes and or return of old ones, or simply just more story-focused content with new mechanics? Also, do you think the role of the 2 new named NPCs in Naboo, what do you think their role will be? So if you don't know what he's talking about with the NPCs, if you go into the Boo, I've only found one of them, but there's 2 new NPCs walking around after title update 3, I think, walking around the Boo who are named, but you can't interact with them. So what I'm going to assume is that they are probably people you need to interact with for the first DLC and maybe even the second one. My guess is that they're going to be the hub to go do those activities, because the Pentagon one, I think it's pretty much assured that we're going to have to take a helicopter there or something to do whatever we're supposed to do there. And if my theory is correct about these expeditions, it'll be something similar. So I think that's their role. Now, when it comes to how I think the DLCs are going to play out, if they're going to be whole new modes, or if they're going to be something different, I think that they're definitely just going to be, I think they're going to be modes, but I think they're also going to put in new mechanics and stuff like that. I wouldn't be surprised if we get some type of something like global events, the way we kind of did in Division 1, maybe in a different way, different rewards and stuff like that. Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of everything to a point. The second question is from the Third Walker, fellow star player. He says, how do you feel about the possibility of Ghost Recon and Division worlds being intertwined? The Ghost, or the Wolves, could in fact be the Hunters. So this is where my grumpy old man, overly protective of the Division story and world comes out. And I don't want that. And it's kind of along the same idea that I've had about how everyone's predicted that the Hunters are Russian agents who have come here to usurp the government and keep us from accomplishing our goal. Um, it's the same idea. To me, it's just not that interesting. Like I don't find it to be like, well, there's no logical connection that's been shown. You know, there's the division's kind of weird, and a game, especially Wildlands, that was basically based off crossovers. Um, Now, my theory on why Wildlands had so many crossovers, and if you like Wildlands, I'm sorry, but I kind of feel like Wildlands was a really weak game, story-wise and stuff like that. So their solution to make it more interesting was to just throw a bunch of other actually interesting characters into the game. Um, and then Division, especially Division 1, the only crossovers were some outfit stuff. And it was mostly like Splinter Cell. There were the Splinter Cell goggles were on Fei Lao's desk. And there were a couple little winks and nods. There's a few of those in Division 2 as well. But the grumpy old man side of me, I don't really love the idea of crossovers with the Division and some of these other franchises. The ghosts make sense-ish, except they're only supposed to operate outside of the states. That was the whole thing about the Rainbow Six game that became Siege, actually, is that you know, there was this idea that it was going to be a domestic terrorism type of thing. I don't see it. If I'm wrong, I'll be happy to have some kind of backstory or something. It's just, I guess for me, the hunters have just been such a compelling enemy in the division that I really want their backstory and their purpose and their reason for existing to be more complicated than, oh, they're just Russians, or oh, they're just old ghosts. Like it makes sense. I get it. And I get why it'd be really cool for people. Like I understand. It's just I really want the hunter story to just be something that no one could have predicted. I want it to be like, oh, holy shit, kind of a deal. And I guess that's where I stand there. That said, the wolves in the new Ghost Recon game look super freaking cool. And if in the division we could ever have capes like that, it'd be pretty sweet. But yeah, I just don't see it the same way I don't see the Russian thing. But that said, I fully recognize that it's probably my grumpiness coming out there. I'm an 80-year-old man in a 31-year-old body. So I appreciate the questions, though. They're super good questions. I have been reading all of the YouTube comments. I read the reviews on iTunes and stuff like that. I might start highlighting those a little bit. And specifically, if anyone asks questions through those methods, I'll be happy to answer them. But yeah, so thank you for that interaction. I really do appreciate it. For content updates, just a reminder for another week and a half or so here, another 2 weeks basically. I am still giving away 2 Division 2 branded Amazon Echo Dots. I post that regularly on Twitter so people can enter. There should be a link either somewhere in whatever method you're listening or watching this, and there should also be a link on my Twitter feed. I'm at Bondiesel. And just kind of talking about streaming a little bit, I've been kind of getting back into it, trying to set somewhat of a regular schedule. We still have lots of stuff to do here at the house for the little one who's coming, and I do need to focus on that. But I still also want to make sure I'm doing my stream thing, and I really appreciate people showing up and hanging out and talking and doing all that fun stuff. It's been a blast. It really has been, and it's just I appreciate the support. It's super nice of you. Okay, and last here, I did want to throw out a shout out to Uber Tim, November, and Mike for being my first 3 Patreons. I do super appreciate that. If you guys want your Bond stickers and all that stuff, please let me know. I believe one of you I've already got the information for, and the other 2 I think are international, so I'll have to figure that out. But just let me know. And if you want to be a part of that, you can check out my Patreon at patreon.com/theechocast. You can see a bunch of benefits there. You get, and I think I have a goal right now that if I hit 10 patrons, I'll start doing like short, exclusive podcasts just for patrons, and just kind of updating things behind the scenes and things that are going on, and kind of having a different angle on some stuff. So that said, you like the podcast, please follow on whatever platform you are using. If you're on iTunes, please rate the podcast and leave a review. It helps me out a ton. If you listen to the podcast on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below and give me some ideas or thoughts or whatever you're thinking. I am on Twitch, where I do stream multiple times a week, and I'm on Twitter, both as Bond Diesel, and that's also where you can find links to a bunch of other stuff I do. That's all I have. So, till next time.